The Autistic Culture Podcast Network, the sound of autistic culture. ATPN.
Hello, I'm Monica Reinagel, host of the Nutrition Diva podcast. Summer is here, and with it, the hot and sticky weather. A morning working in the garden, or maybe on the golf course, can leave you more depleted than you realize, and plain water isn't always the most efficient way to restore the balance. That's where Liquid IV comes in. Its science-backed formula is clinically proven to hydrate faster than water alone. Whether you're exercising, playing outside, or simply surviving a summer heat wave, it's an easy way to stay hydrated. Shop now at liquidiv.com. Liquid IV, hydration that goes wherever life takes you.
Quick question. When was the last time a display ad changed your mind? Now think about the last time a friend told you about something they loved. Different feeling, right? That's how podcast advertising works. A host who's built real trust with their audience talks about your brand in their own words, in their own voice. It doesn't interrupt the experience. It's part of it. With Acast, you can access the world's largest podcast marketplace. Choose the right shows, the right audiences, the right format. Then watch the data tell you it worked. You're not buying impressions. You're buying influence. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
Welcome back to Mindful Mondays. I'm your host, Ashley Dupuy, and this is your weekly space to pause the performance, listen beneath the noise, and become curious about the life asking to be lived. Right here on the Neurodivergent Experience podcast, part of the Autistic Culture Podcast Network. So whether you're neurodivergent yourself, wondering whether you might be, or simply beginning to question whether the life you've built truly fits the person living inside it, you are so very welcome here. And today I want to ask you a rather large question. What if some of what you've spent your life calling your personality is not simply who you are, but who you learned to become? What if your helpfulness and strength, perfectionism, independence, humor and adaptability, or even your ability to disappear, what if all of these things tell us something not only about your character, but about the terrain through which the character had to travel? What if the parts of you that now feel exhausting, confusing, or self-defeating once made exquisite sense? And what if understanding those adaptations could help you begin finding your way back towards a life that really fits? Today, I want to share the beginnings of something that has been taking shape at the heart of my From Mask to Map work, a reflective framework I call the Nine Adaptation Patterns. We won't be exploring all 9 of the patterns in depth today. They deserve room to breathe on their own and will be the focus of next week's episode. Today is about the deeper question beneath them. How do we come to mistake adaptation for identity? And for much of my own life, I believed healing meant becoming better at living the life I already had. The many therapeutic and contemplative practices I discovered helped me enormously. But beneath that healing was a question I hadn't yet learned how to ask. Why did being me require so much management? Why could I appear so capable while struggling so profoundly? Why could I hold space for other people while remaining uncertain about my own needs? And why could I keep going for so long before suddenly having nothing left? And long before I knew I was autistic, I had become very skilled at translating myself into forms that the world could more easily understand. I could sense what a room required and find some way of supplying it, and then seek escape when the internal cost became too much. I didn't yet understand how much effort the translation required, because I'd never known myself without it. Our masks are not necessarily deliberate deceptions. More often than not, they are whole-body adaptations that begin before we possess language for what we're adapting to. We notice which parts of us are welcomed and which seem to make life more difficult for everybody else. And then, often without even realizing it, we make subtle, intelligent adjustments. And for years, we may have been following directions drawn through those masks. Directions shaped by what kept us safe, even when they carried us further away from ourselves. And from mask to map is the process of understanding those survival directions, reading the terrain as it exists now, and beginning to chart a more conscious way back home. And for me, it began not merely as a program or a title of a future book, but as a different way of approaching the self. Because the masks ask, who do I need to become to survive this? But the map asks, what is this showing me about the terrain? And recently, I listened to an extraordinary Huberman Lab conversation with the Jungian analyst Dr. James Hollis. And it felt as though somebody had illuminated the psychological and philosophical spine beneath so much of the work that I'd already been building. Dr. Hollis describes a distinction between the deeper self and our provisional sense of who we are. And you don't have to understand the self in a mystical way. You might think of it as the psyche, or simply the deeper intelligence within us that continues seeking healing and expression beneath all the roles that we've learned to play. And as we grow, we assemble an understanding of ourselves through our encounters with other people and the expectations of the environment surrounding us. We learn what the world seems to require, and we create a functional identity capable of meeting those requirements. And we need that functional identity. Adaptation is not a mistake. Without it, we couldn't navigate the reality into which we were born. But then Dr. Hollis asks a question I realized I'd been circling myself for years. Are you simply here to be a creature of adaptations? That is the question at the heart of From Mask to Map. You know, a strategy can be intelligent. It can be protective. It can even be admired and rewarded by everybody around us. And it can still become too constricting for the life that's trying to emerge. Hollis explains that apparently counterproductive patterns often become logical when we understand the old premise beneath them. Pleasing makes sense if disagreement once threatened connection. Perfectionism may have offered protection from humiliation, while control created stability when other people could not be relied upon. Even becoming unreachable or escaping our own experience can contain an intelligible response to what once felt impossible to remain with. The behavior may no longer fit the present moment, but it's not senseless. It is following instructions written from an earlier terrain. And something else caught my attention in this conversation. As Dr. Hollis spoke about unconscious patterns taking hold of us, Dr. Huberman raised the distinction between state and trait. And that question will be familiar to regular listeners of the podcast because episode 35 was called State or Trait, Rethinking Procrastination and Laziness. We explored what changes when, instead of declaring that someone is lazy or a procrastinator, we become curious about the state in which action has become difficult and ask, what is getting in the way? And this same question can be opened much wider. What happens when a protective state is entered so frequently and for so many years that it begins to look like a personality trait? A child who becomes accommodating whenever connection feels uncertain may eventually be known as naturally easygoing. Or a person who becomes exceptionally capable whenever support feels unreliable may simply become the strong one. Or someone who studies every room and creates the version of themselves most likely to be understood may eventually lose sight of the difference between social performance and personality. And I am not suggesting that personality is an illusion or that every enduring quality began as protection. What I am asking is how much of our personality was allowed to emerge freely and how much was recruited to help us survive. The qualities are real. The question is whether they are freely available or continuously required. Is this something I can do or something I believe I must be? And this brings me back to another framework that has been extraordinarily influential in my work. The Transactional Analysis Drivers that we explored in episode 36, looking at the TA drivers through a neurodivergent lens. So the 5 drivers: be perfect, please others, try hard, be strong, and hurry up. These describe the internal pressure messages that are often learned early and then continue operating largely outside of conscious awareness. And I use these drivers frequently with clients because they offer such a clear and compassionate way of recognizing the instruction running beneath the behavior. When we notice that instruction, we can move through aware, allow, align, recognizing the driver, understanding why it is there, and choosing a response aligned with present-day needs, rather than automatically obeying the old command. And the drivers remain a vital part of From Mask to Map. And the 9 adaptation patterns that I have developed were unquestionably inspired by them, and I want to honor that lineage clearly. But as I continued working with the drivers through my own lived experience and deep research and client work over the last 6 years, I started to feel that another layer was asking to be explored. The drivers help us hear the pressure. I wanted to understand the person-shaped strategy that may develop around it. Who do we become when please others has been organizing our relationships for decades? What protective role emerges when be strong is no longer something we do under pressure, but the identity upon which an entire family depends? And how might these pressures interact with the lived experience of a neurodivergent person who has repeatedly been caught out by invisible rules or painfully misunderstood? And there's no rigid one-to-one correspondence here. The same driver may contribute to several different patterns, depending upon the person, the environment, and what the adaptation was attempting to protect. The drivers name the pressure. The adaptation patterns map the protective role we built around it. And this is where I bring in what I have come to call neurodivergent nuance, a phrase and an orientation that now sits at the heart of my work. Neurodivergent nuance is not simply adding autism or ADHD as a footnote once everything else has already been explained. It is a refusal to interpret behavior without considering the neurological terrain in which that behavior developed. And through this lens, a need for predictability may look less like a desire to control everybody else and more like a nervous system trying to manage genuine cognitive and sensory load. Withdrawal may not mean disinterest when language and social capacity have become temporarily inaccessible. Extensive preparation might carry both the pressure to be perfect and the memory of being caught out by expectations that were never made visible. Without neurodivergent nuance, we risk attaching moralizing labels to behaviors whose function we haven't yet understood. Neurodivergent nuance does not remove responsibility or mean that every protective behavior is harmless. It holds impact alongside context, capacity, and function. Before helping a pattern find another way, we need to understand the problem it believes it is solving. And it's also important I point out these patterns are not exclusive to neurodivergent people, because trauma, family systems, culture, illness, and exclusion can all shape how we adapt. Nor will every neurodivergent person adapt in the same way. That is precisely why the nuance matters. We cannot understand a person by looking only at the behavior that became visible. Over time, these threads began gathering into 9 recognizable patterns. Here they are: the pleaser, the strong one, the rescuer, the perfectionist, the vanisher, the controller, the performer, the chameleon, and the escaper. And these are not diagnoses or fixed personality types or even indicators of neurodivergence. They are compassionate ways of recognizing the protective roles we may have learned to inhabit in order to belong and stay safe and keep going. And most of us will recognize several, if not all of these in themselves, because patterns change with context and capacity. But eventually, the reflective assessment that I am developing will help people identify a primary and a supporting pattern before exploring where those adaptations are currently asking the most from their lives. And this will not put you in a box and define what you are and are not. But what it will do is offer a starting point for you by showing which adaptations have been doing the most work, what they may have protected, and where they're now demanding the highest price. And across the entire framework, the central orientation remains the same. Your adaptation is not your identity. It is part of the survival intelligence that carried you here. So the aim is not to rip away the masks or shame the strategies, but to help the adaptation become more conscious and flexible and freely chosen. Unmasking does not have to mean standing psychologically naked in every room and calling it authenticity. It means recognizing when an adaptation is serving the life we're living and when it is preventing another part of us from living at all. And towards the end of the conversation, Dr. Hollis offered another question. What is wanting to live in this world through me? And I found that absolutely breathtaking, because once we begin understanding who we learn to become, we can start listening for what has not yet had enough room to live. Purpose does not have to mean a grand mission. It may subtly reveal itself through a boundary we've never permitted ourselves to set, or a creative impulse we could no longer bear to keep hidden. Sometimes it is simply the small, persistent truth that makes us feel more alive whenever we move towards it. This is why From Mask to Map has become so important to me. It is the meeting place of my personal history, professional work, neurodivergent understanding, and the questions I have spent a lifetime trying to answer. It is the something that has been trying to live through me. The adaptations helped us navigate the old terrain, but it doesn't automatically know the way into the life waiting for us now. And next week, we will meet all 9 adaptation patterns properly. We will explore what each one may have protected and the genuine strengths that it carried, and what happens when that pattern is required to work too hard. But for this week's microdosing meaning, I want to leave you with a smaller question. Where in my life might a repeated state have become something I call my personality? You may notice yourself agreeing before consulting your capacity, or hiding a difficulty because you are accustomed to coping alone, or rehearsing the version of yourself that feels safest to bring into a room. And instead of immediately trying to change the response, become curious about it. What does this part of me believe it is protecting? What old terrain might it still be navigating? And what else might be available to me now? Perhaps the beginning of charting a new map is not asking, who am I really? Perhaps it begins by asking, who no longer has to run the whole show? And my 8-week From Mask to Map group coaching program begins on the 15th of September and is limited to just 10 people. This founding group will be the first to explore the complete 9 Adaptation Patterns framework as part of our deeper journey from automatic adaptation towards conscious choice. And if you're curious about joining us, you can find all the details at integrativeiom.co.uk. And now I want to guide you into a short practice of meeting the part that learned to adapt. not to correct it or remove it, but to understand what it has been protecting and what it may finally be ready to let you choose. So if you are currently driving or operating heavy machinery, please ensure to pause the recording now until you can safely come back into stillness. And just find a comfortable position. You can be seated or lying down. Just allow your body to find a position in which you can feel fully supported. And whenever you're ready, feel free to gently close your eyes. And just take a moment to notice where you are. Feel the surface beneath you, meeting your weight. And allow the sounds around you to remind the nervous system that you are here, in this room, in this moment. And there's no need to make the breath deeper or slower. Simply notice that breathing is already happening without requiring you to manage it. And as you continue to settle in, can you bring to mind one ordinary moment from recent life in which you noticed yourself adapting? And just make sure to choose something gentle enough to meet today. Perhaps you agreed before knowing what you wanted, or concealed a difficulty, or became a more manageable version of yourself in order to feel accepted. And you don't need to analyze the memory or replay the whole scene. Allow only enough of it to return for you to notice what happened inside. Where do you sense that moment in the body now? Perhaps there's a tightening or an urge to become smaller, or the feeling of preparing to leave. There may be a sensation you cannot name, or no clear sensation at all. Whatever you notice is enough. And now see if you can sense the instruction beneath the adaptation. Not the complete story, just the simple message the nervous system may have received. Perhaps something needed to be kept safe. Held together, or moved away from discomfort. Just let the words come in their own form, without searching for the correct answer. Good, that's right. And now imagine that this adaptation belongs to a part of you that once learned the best way it could through a difficult terrain. You do not have to see this part clearly. It may arrive as an image, a shape, a sensation, or simply the awareness that something within you has been working very hard. And let it remain at whatever distance feels comfortable. And ask it gently, what have you been trying to protect me from? There may be an answer, a memory, a feeling, or silence. Nothing needs to be forced. And then ask, what have you been trying to protect within me? And perhaps it has been guarding something so tender that adaptation once seemed like the only available way to keep it safe. You do not have to approve of every choice this part has made in order to recognize its intention. And just let it know now. I understand that you learned this for a reason. Thank you for carrying me through terrain I did not yet know how to navigate. And you might now imagine that this part has been carrying a set of survival directions. They may be written on folded paper or known by heart after years of repetition. These directions were shaped by what happened then. They contained the routes that reduced danger and preserved connection, or helped you continue when there didn't appear to be another way through. There is no need to tear these directions up. Just notice that they were written for somewhere else. And can you now allow this part to look through your present day eyes? Let it notice who you are now and the choices that weren't available when those directions were first written. Not everything is safe now. Not every environment will understand you. But the terrain is not identical, and neither are you. You are here with this part rather than leaving it to navigate alone. And just ask whether it might be willing to loosen its hold on the directions for just this moment. It does not have to disappear. It does not have to surrender every protection or trust a future it cannot yet see. Perhaps it could simply stop walking several steps ahead, choosing the route before the rest of you has arrived. Imagine inviting it to walk beside you now. close enough to offer its experience, but no longer required to lead every journey. And now, turn the old directions over and notice the blank space on the other side, ready to receive a new direction. What is one present-day direction you might write here? It may be permission to pause, speak one honest sentence, or remain with yourself when somebody else is disappointed. Just let one small direction emerge, something possible and compassionate and true enough for the life that you are living now. You do not need the whole map today. You only need enough awareness to recognize the terrain beneath your feet and enough choice to take the next step consciously. The part that learned the old route may still travel with you. It simply no longer has to choose every direction. And just begin to return your awareness to the surface beneath you. And notice the temperature of the air and the sounds in the room. And allow the breath to deepen if that feels welcome. And invite movement back into the fingers and toes. Take all the time your body needs. Whenever you're ready, and not a moment before, feel free to gently open your eyes, returning to the room with perhaps a little more tenderness for who you learned to become, and a little more curiosity about the way home. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Mindful Monday. Next week, we will take the next step into this work by meeting each of the 9 adaptation patterns more fully. We will explore their protective intelligence and begin noticing how they may combine and overlap and change according to the terrain we're moving through. These patterns are not boxes in which to place ourselves. They are invitations to become more compassionate witnesses to the strategies that shaped us, the strengths that they carry, and the choices that may now be waiting beyond them. And if you'd like to spend a little longer in guided practice with me, you can find my meditations and yoga nidras, nervous system practices, bedtime alchemy stories over on Insight Timer. Just search for Ashley Dupuy. Until then, may you honor the directions that carried you here without mistaking them for the only way forward. And as always, remember, we are all just walking each other home.
Hello, I'm Monica Reinagel, host of the Nutrition Diva podcast. Summer is here, and with it, the hot and sticky weather. A morning working in the garden or maybe on the golf course can leave you more depleted than you realize, and plain water isn't always the most efficient way to restore the balance. That's where Liquid IV comes in. Its science-backed formula is clinically proven to hydrate faster than water alone. Whether you're exercising, playing outside, or simply surviving a summer heat wave, it's an easy way to stay hydrated. Shop now at liquidiv.com. Liquid IV, hydration that goes wherever life takes you.
Here's a tip for you. There's a podcast out there with fans waiting to be your next customer. They tune in every week, they trust the host, and that host wants to talk about brands like yours in their own words to their audience. The problem is, you just haven't been introduced yet. We're Acast, where that introduction happens. As the world's largest podcast marketplace, we let you browse shows, see who's listening, and book host-read sponsorships or run your own ads, all from one platform. Transparent pricing, real-time data, complete control. Start advertising on podcasts by visiting acast.com/advertise.
Thanks for listening. Support autistic-led media through Autistic Culture Plus and enjoy bonus content, early episodes, and ad-free listening. Visit autisticculture.supercast.com to learn more.